Hi, and welcome to the Podcast Business Lunch. I'm Brad Hill, and my guest today is Kathy Doyle. She's the Vice President of Content Development at Macmillan Publishers. Macmillan is the only top 5 book publisher with its own podcast network, so this is going to be interesting. Our sponsors for this series are two of the most prominent businesses in the field, NPR and Triton Digital. And here are their messages.
This lunch is sponsored by NPR, a leader in audio journalism and storytelling for over 50 years. NPR delivers international, national, and local news and programming to audiences via radio, podcasts, and digital platforms. NPR offers brand sponsors an effective and measurable opportunity to connect with its 138 million monthly users who rely on the trusted and valued content provided by 35 news bureaus around the world and hundreds of public media member stations in communities across the country. NPR resonates with listeners and creates a compelling, uncluttered environment for your brand to do the same.
Triton Digital is the global technology and services leader to the digital audio and podcast industry. Triton provides innovative technology to broadcasters and podcasters to build their audience, maximize revenue, and streamline their day-to-day operations. In addition, Triton powers the global online audio industry with Webcast Metrics, the leading online audio measurement service, and Podcast Metrics, one of the first IAB-certified podcast measurement services in the industry. To learn more, visit us at tritondigital.com.
We're grateful for the support of NPR and Triton Digital in sponsoring the Podcast Business Lunch. We really could not do this without that support. And now, here's my conversation with Kathy Doyle. Kathy, thanks for joining me with this.
Hello, Brad. It's so good to see you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You are the Vice President of Content Development at Macmillan Publishers. And you have experience with podcasting in as much as you operated Macmillan's podcast network before elevating to this larger role. Is that right?
That's correct.
Podcasting and book publishing are two very different businesses. And that might be why Macmillan, if I have my facts straight, is the only one of the big 5 book publishers which has its own podcast network.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Now, here's my question. Book publishing and podcast creation are two very different businesses. I mean, the product is different. Consumer expectations are different. The way you make the thing is different. The technology is different. The money making is different. Mm-hmm. In your mind and in your experience, what are the big challenges of starting and operating a podcast network within a major publisher?
I think we see it as both a challenge and a real opportunity. We've been podcasting for 15 years. It actually started back in 2006, 2007, when an editor at Macmillan, John Sterling, picked up the phone and called Mignon Fogarty, who'd been getting a little bit of buzz for these audio tips she was pushing out onto a public feed well before podcasting became anywhere near mainstream, right? And they had a conversation about doing a book. And I feel very fortunate that at that time, Macmillan saw the opportunity to develop podcasts and create wonderful content and distribute it in an audio format in a new and innovative way. So the challenge, of course, for podcasters of all types, everybody who's listening here today knows that it's really challenging to create good podcasts, and particularly podcasts like these that have such longevity. So what happened for us was that Mignon and the team at that time, this was back in 2006, 2007, started to be approached by other subject matter experts. Mignon, of course, is grammar girl, renowned expert in the fields of writing and grammar. She has gone on to produce several books with us, most of which sell incredibly well still today. Mm-hmm. But, very slowly, even before a podcast network was a thing, they started to add new verticals, productivity, nutrition, fitness. And before you knew it, they literally had a podcast network, which has grown to more than 370 million downloads today, expertly run now by Adam Cecil and Emily Miller and a small team of people on staff in New York. And yes, it has changed tremendously. Back in the day, it was a very difficult sell. You mentioned monetization and just, bringing on, making it a profitable business. But these were short format shows. The network is called Quick and Dirty Tips, and it has stayed true to that mission over all of these years. They are short format shows that are monetized, all hosted by top of their field credentialed subject matter experts. At one point in time, 80% of them, to your point about them being divergent businesses, 80% of them actually had book deals with us. And we continue to sign book deals with them today. In fact, our savvy psychologist, one of our savvy psychologists, Dr. Jade Wu, will be releasing a book on sleep. That's her area of expertise as a renowned psychologist, sometime next year with our St. Martin's Press imprint. So they're divergent in a lot of ways. It's a separate business unit, but we can talk more about the ways in which we synergistically and strategically use that to Macmillan's advantage.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. So there does seem to be some back and forth where authors move into the podcast space very conveniently while staying within Macmillan, and the other way around too. Is one of those flows more common or prominent than the other?
That's a really good question. I think it absolutely works both ways. I'm super proud to say that Macmillan has brought on many podcasters with significant book deals. Our Flatiron imprint has the How Stuff Works imprint with iHeart and the hosts of those shows. The second book in that series drops in October. Our Celadon imprint is releasing a book with Paul Holes, who is a really well-known podcaster on the Exactly Right network. His show is Jensen and Holes. It's a true crime show, and it's really popular. The book is called Unmasked, and it releases in April, and it's already getting a tremendous amount of buzz. So a lot of our deals that we're bringing in nowadays are actually with podcast hosts. In fact, I'm really excited to mention the fact that in about 3 or 4 weeks from the time this broadcasts, we will have an announcement about a multi-book deal with a podcast network we all know and love. I wish I could tell you more, but
no, me too.
Sure you get first notice of that when that announcement comes out. So yeah, there's a tremendous amount of synergy between our imprints, podcasters, and the way we now bring in book deals and evaluate podcast hosts who are looking to bring in a book deal to us.
That is so interesting. And at the same time, they are separate units. So the podcasting group lives within Macmillan with its own balance sheet and management structure and product development plans and things like that. Is that right?
Yeah, we actually have 2 networks, one of which is Quick and Dirty Tips, as I mentioned before. And that's actually still, to this day, a joint venture with Mignon Fogarty Grammar Girl and its own separate business unit. In 2017, we started a second network called Macmillan Podcasts, which really just gave us the opportunity to be more creative, to explore podcasting in other genres, do stuff that's longer in format. We did an audio drama with Mac Rogers and his team. We did a biography show with Dave Itzkoff, the culture reporter from the New York Times, who wrote the biography of Robin Williams. And it was sort of a post-release companion podcast that updated. Sadly, Robin Williams had died, and there was a lot of new information. So we really, I think, play to our strengths as book publishers by taking content from authors of all types, from all genres, and producing it in audio format.
It sounds like there's aggressive, I won't use the word aggressive, there is highly initiated output from the podcast network to authors, to Macmillan authors. And this must be an ongoing creative development venture that you're always reaching out to new or to existing writers. Is that right?
Existing writers, existing podcasts. I mean, we spend an awful lot of time leveraging our strengths in the podcasting industry to help authors who perhaps do not have a podcast with us, but are interested in either guesting on a podcast or developing a podcast of their own. So, I think we give a level of author care that is unprecedented in some ways because of our deep knowledge and our deep roots in that space.
How does that conversation go? Let's say you've got an author doing well with a Macmillan book. You reach out to that person and you introduce the idea of starting a podcast. Is there a lot of resistance? Is there a world of questioning? How does it go?
It can go any way. I mean, sometimes we are eager to introduce an author to an outside network where we feel that there's a really good fit for their podcast. Like I said, a lot of times we will just provide guidance and consultation in terms of helping to find the right network, the right production, or even just talking through and spitballing ideas. Every imprint has an incredible, strong team of publicists, and they are experts at finding placement for our authors on like-minded shows to help promote books. And we also use our networks in ways that I think are really innovative to help promote the work of, some of the world's best authors. We might do, for example, we have a show called Driving the Green Book, which we can talk a little bit more about later. But
we will.
Okay, good. That show is hosted by a former BBC journalist and educator, Alvin Hall. And it's there's a new book that came out called How Can We Win by Kimberly Jones, which is one of our Holt new releases. She gave this incredibly viral speech, off the top of her head during the George Floyd, protest period. And if you Google, you will see this incredibly powerful video. And now there is a book that digs deeper into the discussion that she had really off the top of her head about economic disparities faced by Black Americans today. So the Holtz did a wonderful job working with her, turning that into a book. I thought, this is really an incredible book that would serve the listeners of Driving the Green Book very well, like-minded content. I reached out to Alvin Hall, the host of that show, which is now on hiatus. It's finished, right? We finished it last year. It's completed, and the feed is just sitting there. I said, Alvin, I think dropping an audio excerpt of this book onto that feed might be a really nice experience for listeners. Not only had Alvin already read the book, but he's like, when do you need me in the studio? So just the collaborating that we do with hosts from all of our different shows, the publicists, the marketers, the editors, the publishers, and our authors, it's a really well-oiled machine. And I think one that helps serve readers and listeners really, really well.
And I'm interested in how the money-making works for the podcasters who are already Macmillan authors. When you bring them in and start producing a podcast, do they get some contract that resembles a book contract, or is it revenue share, or what is it?
It's a revenue share. It's a revenue share. I think we do a really good job with our ad operations. It's a well-oiled machine. Initially, it was very difficult to monetize the short format. Back in 2007, 2008, when some of the agencies like the mid-rolls were up and coming and starting to sell ads, on behalf of podcasters. Most of the shows that we're selling were much longer in format. So I think the team worked incredibly hard to develop a process that to this day really embraces the format. We always say it's not just about, driving revenue. It's about serving both the advertiser and the listener with a really high quality experience that can help drive that revenue. So we're really mindful when talking points come in from a sponsor. Our team really takes the time to massage them and to make sure that they sound very genuine and to work directly with the host. Sometimes we'll even do calls with the sponsors and the agencies to just make sure we're on track and we are going to meet that direct response quota, whatever that is, even though no one will ever tell us what that is. Of course, in the early days, that's all we got, right? Were the direct response ads.
Yeah.
And the only way you knew if you hit your number was if that sponsor came back. Still a very closely guarded secret today. You never get those numbers, but now we're seeing a lot more brand campaigns for brand lift, which is really exciting. So they're monetized via sponsorship is a long-winded way of answering your question. But there's other revenue sources too. Sometimes there's licensing. Some of the hosts do courses on LinkedIn based on some of their podcast content, and of course books. So it's a multi-pronged approach, primarily driven by sponsorship.
Okay. I'm glad for this detailed explanation. Thank you. And let's stick with advertising a bit. So how are the shows represented? Do you have your own sales force, or are they ad reps? Is that outsourced?
So I like to say that Eric Dean, Mary Beth Roche, and I sat in a room back in 2013 in the Flatiron Building, and we were the very first network, to my knowledge, to sign on with Midroll Stitcher. And they remain.
Oh, how interesting.
Yes. And Eric Dean has since moved on. Mary Beth Roche is still the president and publisher of Macmillan Audio. But it was a big deal at the time. It was a big deal at the time. So, and they remain a wonderful partner to this day.
Okay. So they rep the ads. You get a mix of direct-to-consumer and brand lift advertisers. And this revenue gets shared with the authors according to some kind of contractual agreement. Have I got the basics right?
You got the basics right, yeah.
Can you tell me the size of the staff for the whole podcast venture at Macmillan?
Sure. So there's a full-time staff of 4, again, led by Adam Cecil and Emily Miller. And then there are 3 freelance audio producers who work directly with either assigned to a host, multiple hosts in this case. And then, of course, the team of hosts, which I think is like currently at about 9 or 10 weekly shows for QDT. At one point in time, we had about 15 shows per week. So it's a heavy workload.
One of the most celebrated of your titles, I'm sure, is Driving the Green Book. You mentioned it before, and I had it on my plan to ask you about this. Anyway, so let's dig into that one a little bit. First of all, explain to everyone, please, the rationale of the podcast.
So Driving the Green Book came to us through BBC journalist and educator Alvin Hall, who's very prominently known as one of the leading authorities on the Green Book, which was, of course, a travel guide used during segregation, during the Jim Crow era, to help Black Americans get safe passage as they traveled the roads of the United States. So Alvin had this idea for a podcast, and we actually sent Alvin out on the road with a producer and with activist Janae Woods-Weber. They took a 2,500-mile road trip from Detroit to New Orleans over a 10-day period. And, they interviewed activists, government officials, people who had just experienced travel by relying on the Green Book with their families back in the day, historians, musicians, and really just they stopped at places along the way that were documented in the guide. Many places were still in existence. Many of the people who had been through that era were still there. So they came back with just this incredible, powerful collection of American stories that, from our point of view, were underreported. So I vividly remember us all sitting in a conference room and listening to some of the raw tape when they got back from this trip. And it was incredibly powerful. We knew at that point we had a tremendous responsibility to tell these stories and to document them for generations to come. And that was the origins of the 10-part documentary series that launched in September of 2020. When we started to work on how we were going to get this out and promote it, we had a conversation with the team at Apple. And unbeknownst to us, and this was all true, also I should say that we were in production when the pandemic hit. Alvin had been in our studios and I think had recorded just the first 2 episodes. So it presented us with a really tremendous challenge in terms of how we were going to finish up the series and stay on schedule. But we did that. We pivoted. And then I think we also had an opportunity when the very unfortunate killing of George Floyd happened to really take a step back and make sure that elements of what we were seeing today in terms of unrest in our society was woven into the storytelling. It was irresponsible not to do that. So the story came together beautifully. We worked with Jalea Galantigua and Cedric Wilson, her producer, with an original score. And we were so proud of this series. We talked to Apple about, a launch plan for it. Unbeknownst to us, they had been working with the Apple Maps team on something called Apple Map Guides. And these were really visual experiences that you could have on Apple Maps, where you could actually look and take a virtual tour through a road trip using your phone or a browser on Safari. So they put us under NDA. We couldn't talk about it, but we actually very quietly worked with the collection of photos that the team had taken on the road, some open source available photographs of, we reached out to some of the family-owned businesses that were documented in the Green Book and got photos from archives. And we put together this very visual, very beautiful travel guide, Apple Map Guide, to be a companion to the podcast. So I love the fact that when this ultimately released in September of 2020, it was really a multi-platform experience because we had the podcast, we had the Apple Map Guide, and then we also had Alvin work with the books team at Apple to create an author recommends page on Apple Books, so that anyone who listened to the podcast and wanted to dig deeper into the history of the Green Book had a recommended reading list to do so. And then the last pillar in all of that was Apple Music. We put together playlists of period-specific music. And then, of course, Alvin and Janae had a great playlist of music they just listened to while they were on the road. So we did that too. And it just made for a really well-rounded experience that I think is becoming a little bit more commonplace today. In the podcast space, ways to complement the audio with other elements.
Yes, not sure I would call it commonplace. I mean, this still seems breakthrough to me. And the production challenges seem remarkable to me. You've got 2 people out on the road, and did they come back between episodes, or were they gone for 10 weeks? I mean, fill in some details. I'm always interested in the production logistics.
They had a freelance producer with them. They were only out on the road for 10 days. So it was a very packed schedule with a tremendous amount of logistics involved.
They drove, if I may interrupt, they drove from Detroit to where? What was the route?
They started in Detroit and they ended in New Orleans, which was a very typical route, for Green Book travel. So it was 10 days. Emily Miller on our team helped coordinate what was a logistical nightmare in terms of making sure that all the interviews were set up, the hotels. It was really anybody who's embarked on this, and I'm sure many of your viewers today can relate to doing these kinds of experiences with podcasting. But the logistics were quite comprehensive.
All right. What a cool project.
Yeah,
Boy,
thank you.
Congratulations on that. It's been a while since it was launched. Is it still getting traction? You getting?
Yeah, it's funny because it's Black History Month, and I just noticed that it was featured on some of the platforms, so it still gets a lot of love. It made a tremendous, first of all, it won the inaugural Ambie for Best History Podcast from the Podcast Academy, so that was great. And at the end of 2021 even, it was still listed in a lot of best of, those wonderful lists that come out that compile and curate lots of great podcasts. It still gets surfaced all the time. I think it has really long legs. And again, I think these are underreported American stories that deserve to be told and heard for generations to come. So I anticipate it being around for a very long time.
Good. All right. Anything else you want to tell me about the future of podcasting at Macmillan?
I again have to say that I just feel we are all very fortunate to work for a company that understands the value of content in whatever format it's served in. So I think we will continue to see sort of the convergence of audio. You had Tom Webster on a couple of weeks ago, and he talked so much about this and the growing and emerging value of audio. So I think we'll continue to see creativity on the audiobook side. We'll continue to see creativity on the podcasting side. And the networks have a very long life ahead of them. So.
Well, congratulations on everything you've accomplished, Kathy.
You.
And thanks so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun, Brad.
That's all for today's edition of the Podcast Business Lunch. Many thanks to Kathy Doyle for taking the time to join us. We're grateful to be sponsored by NPR and Triton Digital. Without their support, this series would not be possible. Go to rainnews.com, the website, in order to get more information about the series, upcoming episodes and guests, transcripts, videos, and more. It's all packed into the sidebar of the website, which makes it convenient and easy. And while you're there, make sure that you are subscribed to the Rain Daily Digest email newsletter. It's free, and it is the preeminent trade publication of the online audio industries. That's all for today. I'm Brad Hill, and I'll see you next time.